Hi Erin, hi, my bookshelves are full. Justin Somper here, author of Vampirates. Thank you so much for having me swing by on my Vampirates blog tour. You've asked me to say a little bit about mixing genres within Vampirates, and I'm delighted to do so. I think the first thing to say is that I didn't intentionally set out to mix up genres. I didn't intentionally to take vampire stories on the one hand and pirate stories on the other and mesh them together. It all came about because the original idea for Vampirates just came from the word one day dropping into my head. Vampirates. That was the big light bulb moment. And as you can imagine, it was incredibly exciting when that word landed in my head. It felt so real and concrete, as though it could actually already be in a dictionary. And the first challenge, and a big challenge with addressing this project, was starting to build out the world of the story so that the world of Vampirates could feel as concrete as that word does. You could say that there are two worlds within the story of Vampirates. There's the world of the pirates on the one hand and the realm of the Vampirates on the other. And initially in the books, they're quite separate, but quite quickly they start to cross over. It was really important to me to make both those worlds as believable as possible. I think when you're writing a fantasy adventure, that is really important, that the reader can not only see those worlds, but hear them and smell them. So that's something I wanted to work really hard on. But how did I go about doing that? So on the pirate side of the story, we've got the all-powerful Pirate Federation, who essentially governs the oceans. And one of the ways that they do that is that they've literally carved up sea lanes within the ocean and assigned those to each of their pirate captains to give them safe passage. Now that was not an original idea, but one that I came across when I was researching the golden era of piracy. But I immediately seized on it because I thought this is just the kind of thing I'm looking for. It's going to make this world seem more concrete and actually in a way a little bit bureaucratic. The Pirate Federation also has the Pirate Academy, this elite school for young pirates aged 7 to 17 who are being trained up to be the best of the best. And of course, Cheng Li, who we first meet age 17, has just recently graduated from the Pirate Academy, and that's why she's already deputy captain aboard the Diablo. In conjuring up the Pirate Academy, I wanted to create a balance for the reader that this was quite a fantastical and exotic place on the one hand, but also tangible and something that they could relate to, because obviously my readers know what it's like to go to school. So on the fantastical side of things, I wanted to have a very exotic location for this school. I think there's some stunning locations within the school, but itself as a whole, it's set right on the ocean and it has these big sweeping lawns. It has ships that you can have role-play fights on. But I suppose one of my favourite locations is the Rotunda, which is kind of the assembly hall. It has a blue glass roof and the light comes through and just sheds this watery blue light into the room. Suspended on thin wires from the top of the ceiling are glass cases, each of which contains a sword belonging to a legendary pirate, many of whom are now teachers at the academy. So these swords hang from the ceiling, suspended in glass with the watery blue light, and it's almost like they're swimming there. In terms of making the school tangible and relatable for the reader, I had some fun creating the timetable. And what I did is I borrowed my nephew Matt's school timetable at the time. I think he was in year 7, maybe year 8. And I just swapped out some of the lessons. So instead of double maths, we had MAS, which is Maritime Attack Strategy, got rid of PE, put in a combat workshop, put in practical piracy and seafaring. So although the lessons are really out there and obviously relevant to the story, I think just the fact of that timetable is something for kids to really relate to, and it makes that setting and that school feel much more concrete. Now moving on to the vampire side of the story, and I suppose the biggest challenge with the vampires was putting a fresh spin on the vampire myth, and again making that believable. And the big twist that we have in the first book, Demons of the Ocean, is around blood taking. So Grace is on board the Nocturne, this ship of vampire pirates. She's not terrified, she's intrigued by the crew, but she obviously has some concerns about blood taking. And she discovers that there is an elaborate ritual system around blood taking on board the ship. There is a whole other crew of donors. There's one donor for each vampirate, and once a week there's a feast night, and those pairs come together and the sharing occurs, and the donor gives a small portion of blood to their vampirate partner. It's not enough blood that it's going to unduly hurt the donor. It's going to make them need to rest for a little while, but that's it. So nobody is going to die. And for the vampire, it's like this amazing vitamin injection, which is going to keep them going for the next week. So this highly effective system is what has enabled the Nocturne to sail largely undetected since the beginnings of time. But of course, as you know, if you've read the first book, it's a fragile balance, that system, and Sidorio decides to rebel against it. So he takes too much blood on the night of the feast, he attacks Grace, he's ultimately expelled from the ship, and off he goes to set up his own command. And his own command, of course, will have a very different attitude towards blood taking. It'll be the case of, take as much as you want, for as long as you want. And I guess within the series as a whole, there is quite a strong theme around appetite. But it was really important to me from the beginning of working on these books that it wasn't straightforwardly the pirates are the good guys, the vampires are the bad guys, just because the vampires have this appetite for blood. So you're going to find the theme of appetite coming at you from both sides of the story. Sure, you're going to find some vampires who are taking a lot of blood. Actually, as we go into book 3, you're also going to find vampires who are struggling by not wanting to take any blood at all. And you're certainly going to find vampires throughout the story who are doing their best to protect each other, or in Lorcan's case, to protect Grace. And then on the pirate side of the story, don't think that they're all the good guys, because, for instance, in the second book, Tide of Terror, we see Captain Malacco Wraith act incredibly irresponsibly, and what he does leads to the death of a young and very beloved member of his crew. So I wanted to have that balance on both sides of the story around the idea of appetite. And that idea of that, it's not clear cut who the villains are. You have to journey through the story like Connor and Grace and work that out for yourself. To my mind, that makes it less predictable, more unexpected, and also, I think, more true to life. I said at the beginning about how the idea for Vampirates came to me as a kind of light bulb moment. And it's fair to say that while I was writing the first book, I didn't really know what the thematic connection between the vampires and the pirates was going to be. And it was only really as I came quite near to writing the end of the first book that I had a second light bulb moment and I realised this is what it is. And it's to do with making your life meaningful, however long or short your life might be. So there's a fair bit of talk in the first book on the pirate side of the story from Malacco and Bart about a pirate's life being a short but merry one. Bart tells Connor that he doesn't think he's going to live to see 30. So for the pirates, which is a very violent world that they live in, there's this idea of that their lives will probably be quite short, but how can they make them meaningful? And then if you contrast that with the vampire side of the story, of course, they have this infinite amount of life. But similarly, faced with that challenge, how do they make their lives meaningful? And that's something that I think Lorcan talks about towards the end of the second book. So, as I say, I didn't have that idea in my head at the beginning of writing, but in the process of writing, that idea came forward. And that was something that really helped very strongly to mesh the two worlds of characters together. That's part of the magic of writing, I guess. Thank you so much for having me here today to talk about blending genres within Vampirates. I hope that's been interesting for you. And thank you so much for supporting my Vampirates blog tour.